Bonjour à toutes et à tous, on va commencer. Sangye Chetang Soki Chonam La Chanchu Patu Dani Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gi Pesenam Ki Chola Penchil Sangye Drupa Sho Sangye Chetang Soki Chonam La Chu Patu Dani Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gi Pesenam Ki Chola Penchil Sangye Drupa Sho Sangye Chetan Chonam La Chanchu Dani Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gi Nam Ki Chola Penchil Sangye Drupa Sho Sam Shan Tam She Deo Tong De Wei Kyu Tong Den Pa Kyu Nel Tong Du Nel Gi Yu Tong Gyu Chi Du Nel Me Pe De Wa Pa Tong Min Re Wa Gyu Chi Nye Rin Sha Dong Tong Nyom Shan Po La Ne Pa Gyu Chi Pel Den Sa We Lama Rinpoche Dagi Chi Wo Pe Me Den Chula Kadrin Chen Pe Go Ne Je Sunt Kusun Tu Ki Ga Drup Sel Tu Sa Chom Den De Jam Pe Yang La Chak Se Lu Gong Gi Lo Je Tim Ni Tin Ne Ta Nam Da Krap Se Lue Chi Nye Den Ku Chi Shi Si Chi Ni Ki Tu Ka Ling Mam Si Gang Dak Si Pe Sa Na Min Tom Dung Nyer Gi Si Wei Ku Na Bu Chi Ta Se Yan Lai Du Shu Yong De Song Do Ta Chen Do Nye Mo Ki Sha Do Zhu Se Ching Ma Rik Me Se Du Nye Nyu Gu Chi Nye Je Se Ren Tri Nam De Ne Da Shi Sa Chi Tian Te Li Zo Gyal Se Tu We Ku Chu Da Chu Dan Chu Ni Gyal Dak Le Me Se Jam Pe Yang La Du Tse Den Ke Ki Ken Ra Be Se Dak Le Ti Mu Min Pa Ram Se Li Ka Tan Ten Shi Shu Lu To Pa Yi Lo Zhi Po Pe Non Wa Tsel Tu Sa
We're currently presenting the 5 vehicles. A vehicle is what allows to bring us exactly to the fruit associated with the practice. We already saw that the 2 worldly vehicles, the vehicle of gods and men and the vehicle of Brahma, we already saw these 2. And now we're looking at the 3 vehicles that lead beyond the world. These 3 vehicles are the Shravakayana, the Pratyekabudayana, and the Mahayana. Out of these 3, yesterday we finished presenting the Shravakayana. And today we're going to look at the Pratyekabudayana and we'll begin the Mahayana. When Khenpo presented these 3 vehicles that lead beyond the world, he spoke to us about the direct and indirect disciples of the Buddha. The indirect disciples are disciples other than humans and gods, and direct disciples are humans and gods. Among the direct disciples, he said that there are 4 affiliations: the interrupted affiliation, the Shravaka affiliation, the Pratyabhudayana affiliation, and the Mahayana affiliation. He started by presenting the interrupted affiliation, and then he presented the Shravaka affiliation, in other words, the vehicle of the Shravaka. Then he presented the Pratyabhudayana affiliation, in other words, the vehicle of the Pratyabhudas. The vehicle of the Pratyabhudas. He started this presentation of the Pratyabhudayana affiliation by saying that the characteristics of the Pratyabhudayana affiliation are explained in the Ornament of the Precious Liberation by Khenpo. The Ornament of Precious Liberation concerning this affiliation is: they are disenchanted with existence and rejoice in nirvana. They have lesser compassion and great pride. They keep their master secret and prefer to stay alone. The Panditas know them as the Pratyabhuda affiliation. They're disenchanted with existence and rejoice in nirvana. They have lesser compassion and great pride. They keep their master's secret and prefer to stay alone. Panditas know them as the Pratyabhuda affiliation. Khenpo's explanation concerning the Pratyabhudas involves the same 6 points as the Shravaka vehicle. We'll first look at the meaning of the term, then the access to this path, then the disciplines, then the view to actualize, then the fruit, and lastly, the divisions within this path. We'll start with the first point, which is the meaning of the term Pratyabhuda. The term Pratyabhuda in Sanskrit, or Rongkyel in Tibetan, refers to the fact that an individual of this affiliation has in their past lives studied a Buddhist teaching. Then, on this basis, they attain the fruit of Arhat in this lifetime without following a master. On the basis of their practice, they actualize the fruit in this lifetime on their own. They actualize the fruit in this lifetime alone on the basis of their meditative practice. This is what the term Rongel means. Rong means oneself, and Kel means victorious. Which refers to the fact that this individual is someone who accomplishes victory themselves on the basis of their own efforts. Now we'll look at the second point, the access to this path. What is the entry to this path? This entry is the understanding of the 12 components of dependent arising. This understanding spontaneously manifests in the mind of a Pratyeka Buddha practitioner due to the circumstances, due to their training in reflection during previous lives. The third point is the disciplines of the Pratyeka Buddhayana. These are the same as those of the Shravakayana. The fourth point is the view to be actualized. This view to be actualized in the context of the Pratyeka Buddhayana has a few differences concerning or in relation to the view that is maintained in the Shravakayana. In the Shravakayana, the practitioner concentrates particularly on the actualization of the non-existence of identity of the individual. On the basis of studying and reflection, they acquire the understanding that phenomena are also devoid of all identity. However, they don't cultivate this understanding in a more developed way. They specifically focus on meditation or familiarization on the non-existence of identity of the individual in order to actualize the fruit of the Shravakayana. Indeed, their goal is to eradicate the notion of a self in order to liberate themselves from samsara. So they concentrate on the non-existence of identity of the individual without emphasizing that of phenomena. Concerning the Pratyeka Buddhayana, the practitioner focuses on the non-existence of identity of the individual, but also on the non-existence of identity of phenomena. On this basis, they establish that objects they apprehend are devoid of all truly existing nature. The non-existence of identity of the individual and the non-existence of identity of phenomena are both established. A practitioner of the Pratyeka focuses on the non-existence of identity of the individual and also on the non-existence of identity of phenomena. By focusing on the non-existence of identity of phenomena, they will establish that all objects apprehended are devoid of any true existence. The non-existence of identity of the individual and phenomena are both established. However, they don't fully realize that the mind that apprehends does not truly exist. There are objects that are apprehended, but there's also the mind that apprehends. The practitioner of the Pratyeka will not fully realize that the mind that apprehends does not truly exist. They think that the most subtle perspective of mind, in other words, animate and knowing instants, moments, that these truly exist. This concerns a view that resembles that of the Chitramata school, which is one of the Mahayana schools. This brings us to the fifth point, the fruit actualized by this path. This fruit is the same as that of the Shravakayana. In other words, the state of arhathood with remains and without remains. This brings us to the sixth point. The sixth point that looks at the divisions within this vehicle, within the Pratyeka. Khenpo explained that there are two divisions within the Pratyeka. There are two types of Pratyeka Buddhas, in other words. One Pratyeka Buddha, which is said to be said to resemble a rhinoceros. And then another type, said to be a Pratyeka Buddha resembling a parrot. The Pratyeka Buddha resembling a rhinoceros lives alone, doesn't really have any social connections with the outer world. Rhinoceri are solitary animals. They don't live in herds. Whereas the Pratyeka Buddha that resembles a parrot lives in community, interacts with other individuals. But the members of the community must also follow the Pratyeka Buddhayana. These Pratyeka Buddhas are said to resemble parrots because parrots live in large groups, but they don't interact with other birds, apparently. They stick together, but they don't have like a group mindset. So those are the two types, and then Khenpo gave a slightly more detailed presentation. What is the difference between these two types of Pratyeka Buddhas? The Pratyeka Buddhas, resembling rhinoceros, they are practitioners, Pratyeka Buddhas, endowed with what are said to be superior capacities or faculties. These practitioners have trained for 100 kalpas, and during these 100 kalpas, they have requested the teaching from the Buddhas. They accomplished vast virtuous actions, offerings, etc. And in particular, they have the ability to know, as a Pandita does, the 6 modes of being. For those who have studied entry to the state of a Pandita, this should ring a bell. These Pratyeka Buddhas, resembling rhinoceros, have studied the 6 modes of being for 100 kalpas. So they know the 6 modes of being, or are capable of knowing the 6 modes of being in the same way as a Pandita. These 6 modes of being are the 5 aggregates, the 18 dhatus, the 12 ayatanas, the 12 components of the process of dependent arising, that which is mode of being and that which is not, that which is a mode of being and that which is not. Khenpo gave a very brief explanation here. He said that this concerns what constitutes an appropriate basis for becoming a Buddha, for being a Buddha, for becoming a Shravaka practitioner, and what does not constitute an appropriate basis for this. And then the 6th mode of being that the Pratyeka Buddhas, resembling rhinoceros, know in the way of a Pandita are the 4 truths of the Noble Ones. A Pratyeka Buddha resembling rhinoceros has studied in great detail for 100 kalpas, 100 kalpas that precede the lifetime in which they will become an arhat of the Pratyeka Buddhayana. And these 100 kalpas of study were dedicated to these 6 modes of being. During these 100 kalpas, the Pratyeka Buddha is on the path of accumulation. And at the end of these 100 kalpas, they express 3 specific aspirations. The first aspiration is to take birth in a world where there are neither Shravakas nor Buddhas. That's indeed what happens. They take birth, they are reborn during a time period when the Buddhist teaching is not present. For example, it is said that during the time when Shakyamuni Buddha's teaching has disappeared, and so between this time and the coming of Maitreya Buddha, there will be roughly 80,000 Pratyeka Buddhas who will manifest. That's their first specific aspiration. The second specific aspiration of these Pratyeka Buddhas resembling rhinoceros is to actualize liberation themselves without following the teaching of anyone, only relying on themselves. Their third specific aspiration is to accomplish the benefit of others. Pratyeka Buddhas resembling rhinoceros attain at some point in their present life, after 100 kalpas of accumulation of merit and knowledge, they attain the state of arhathood. When they are still connected with their physical body, when they have attained the state of arhat with remains, then they are capable of accomplishing the benefit of beings. However, they don't do this by teaching. Pratyeka Buddhas resembling rhinoceros do not teach. So how do they accomplish the benefit of beings? They do so by manifesting miracles. They manifest miracles, and beings who witness these miracles will be able to give rise to trust and then enter into contact with the following Buddha's teaching. On what basis do Pratyeka Buddhas resembling rhinoceros attain the state of arhathood of the Pratyeka Buddhayana? Good question. I'll answer it. The practitioner of the Pratyeka Buddhayana, resembling rhinoceros, takes birth in a world where the Buddha's teaching is not available. We saw why they choose to, why they're born in this time, because they have expressed this wish. This practitioner has deep imprints due to having been close to Buddhas over the course of 100 kalpas, having received their teachings. They have considerable imprints in their minds. In their present lifetime, at a certain point, for example, Khenpo said, they will find themselves in specific circumstances. For example, going by a cemetery and seeing a skeleton, a cadaver. That's a circumstance that can occur. When they encounter these specific circumstances, the practitioner of the Pratyeka Buddhayana will observe the skeleton or cadaver, and everything that they have learned in their previous lifetimes will naturally manifest in their mind. At this point, they will understand birth, aging, death. In other words, they'll understand the connections, the logic of the 12 components of dependent arising. This arises naturally due to the circumstances they encounter. Once this understanding arises in their mind, the practitioner of the Pratyeka Buddhayana will settle into samadhi. We said that during the past 100 lifetimes, this practitioner was on the path of accumulation. So when this practitioner when this practitioner is born in their current lifetime, they are at they're at the highest level of the path of accumulation. When they enter into samadhi, then they begin by actualizing the wisdom of the paths of junction and of seeing and training, and then will attain the path of no more learning, the final one. All of this will occur in a single session of meditation. This is how a Pratyeka Buddha resembling a rhinoceros attains the state of arhathood of the Pratyeka Buddhayana. This type of arhat of the Pratyeka Buddhayana remains alone. We never find them in groups. They are arhats who have an unimaginable level of foresight. For example, when they look at the world, they can see which beings have the necessary merit. And when they see such a being, they go toward this being. They enter into contact with these beings. They carry out miracles. They express wishes, and then they disappear. They head off. Their work is done. That's a somewhat more detailed explanation of the Pratyeka Buddhas resembling rhinoceros. So what about the Pratyeka Buddhas resembling parrots? So a Pratyeka Buddha resembling a parrot likes to be in a group. Their faculties are not as heightened, not as sharp as those of a Pratyeka Buddha resembling a rhinoceros. Like the Pratyeka Buddha resembling a rhinoceros, the Pratyeka Buddha resembling a parrot has, in their past lives, accomplished offerings to the Buddha and acquired knowledge of the 6 modes of being, but not over 100 kalpas, only over 40 kalpas. At the conclusion of these 40 kalpas, this Pratyeka Buddha, according to their aspirations, will also take rebirth in a time and a world without a Buddha. Due to their latent imprints, they once again integrate the 6 modes of being and enter a bit into samadhi. In general, on this basis, they won't go beyond the first 2 levels of the path of junction in this lifetime. The first 2 levels of the path of junction are called heat and peak. In this lifetime, they won't go beyond these first 2 levels of the path of junction. Following their death, they will once again take birth in the same world where the Buddha's teaching is not available and continue to develop their understanding of the 6 modes of being. At the conclusion or following, at the conclusion of these 2 rebirths, they will actualize the wisdom of the path of junction, that of the path of seeing, and they will finally attain the state of arhathood. So in their first lifetime, based on their samadhi, they'll go through the first 2 levels of the path of junction, and then in the second lifetime, they will accomplish the second 2 levels to conclude the path of junction, actualize the wisdom of the path of junction, and then continue by actualizing the wisdom of the path of seeing, and will finish by attaining the state of arhathood. That's in general, but there are always some exceptions, as you may have noticed. Nothing's entirely fixed in Buddhism. In certain cases, this kind of practitioner of the Pratyeka Buddhayana can attain the state of arhathood in this first lifetime, following 40 kalpas of accumulation of merit and wisdom. During the first lifetime that follows the 40th kalpa, they might attain the state of arhathood directly. Some are not capable of this, and then they take birth once more to continue their training. And it takes them longer to attain the state of arhat. Some attain arhathood in 2 lives, some in 3 lives. That's what Khenpo explained. These arhats will sometimes transmit teachings to others, but without teaching in an extensive way. It's said that they live in group, but they don't live in villages. They live in solitary places with other practitioners like themselves. This concludes the affiliation of the Pratyeka. This brings us to the Mahayana affiliation, or the 3rd vehicle that leads beyond the world. We briefly explained the path of the Shravaka and the Pratyeka Buddhas. Now we'll begin the explanations of the Mahayana. It's important to keep in mind that a bodhisattva who practices the Mahayana must also know and practice the first 2 paths, the 2 previous paths. These 2 previous paths are the basis that allow them to practice the Mahayana. If we take the example of the preliminary practices that we find in the Kagyu lineage, and more specifically, the first 4 preliminary practices that are common, the 4 thoughts that turn one away from samsara. These 4 thoughts that help us turn away from samsara are common to the Shravakayana, the Pratyeka and the Mahayana. Like a Shravaka practitioner, a Mahayana practitioner must also have a heightened awareness of the fact that progress along the path. And in this sense, in the sutras of the Prajnaparamita, Buddha Shakyamuni says that a bodhisattva progresses on the basis of their accomplishment of the Shravakayana. They need to accomplish the paths of accumulation, of junction, and of seeing of the Shravakayana. But Khenpo specified they don't need to go any higher in this vehicle. Then they will enter into the path of familiarization that is specific to the Mahayana. They need to accomplish the path of accumulation and junction of and vision of the Shravakayana, but they won't take the path of familiarization that's specific to the Shravakayana. They will take the path of familiarization that is specific to the Mahayana. A bodhisattva must also study the three yanas, three paths, three vehicles, in order to be able to teach them to others. A bodhisattva accomplishes the benefit of others by guiding them according to their own affiliation. If they see someone who is not capable of practicing the Mahayana, if they see that it's someone who, for example, has the Shravakayana affiliation, then they will teach this person the Shravakayana. If this bodhisattva has disciples who only wish to take rebirth as human or God in the higher existences, then they will teach them the worldly path. And when they encounter beings of Shravakayana, Pratyekya or Mahayana affiliation, then this bodhisattva will teach the three vehicles of definitive benefit. In other words, these three, the Shravakayana, Pratyekya and Mahayana. So, a practitioner of the Mahayana does not abandon the Shravakayana and the Pratyekya. All of these vehicles are necessary to know. Nevertheless, there are great differences between the foundational vehicles and the Mahayana. Indeed. Khenpo starts after this starts explaining the Mahayana to us in two parts. His explanation involves two parts. The first part is the difference between the foundational vehicles and the Mahayana, the great vehicle. And the second part is a presentation of the Mahayana in and of itself. We'll start with the first part. The difference between the foundational vehicles, the Shravakayana and Pratyekya and the Mahayana, the great vehicle. Khenpo told us that we find a certain number of lists that explain the difference between the foundational vehicles and the Mahayana. There are various sutras, etc. But the explanation that he gave us refers to what the 8th Karmapa, Mikya Dorje, said on the subject. The 8th Karmapa, Mikya Dorje, explains that there are 5 major differences that establish the Mahayana, the great vehicle, as great or eminent. The first of these 5 points, these 5 major differences, is the view. Therefore, the absolute or ultimate knowledge of reality that is perfected, completed, is different. The knowledge of an arhat and the knowledge of a bodhisattva on the bodhisattva levels is different. Just as the knowledge of bodhisattvas varies, view of the Mahayana, Khenpo briefly gave us a quick quick reminder of what the view of the Shravakayana is. He said that a practitioner of the Shravakayana, from the Mahayana point of view, analyzes the course perspective of the 5 aggregates and establishes, on the basis of this analysis, that no true existence can be attributed to them. There is no individual within their 5 aggregates. Then, in a more subtle way, in a subtler way, they will analyze the aggregate of consciousness. So it begins with a coarse perspective that analyzes the 5 aggregates, and then there's a subtler perspective that analyzes consciousnesses, the continuity of consciousness. On the basis of these 2 analyses, they establish the non-existence of the individual. And then they familiarize themselves primarily with this, the non-existence of the individual. According to the Mahayana, we're looking at what happens in the Shravakayana, but from the point of view of the Mahayana. So according to the Mahayana, the continuity of mind, the continuity of consciousness, is the continuity of the basis for all consciousness, the 8th consciousness. On the basis of the analysis of the basis for all, in other words, on the basis of the analysis of the continuity of consciousness, what happens for an arhat of the Shravakayana or Pratyabodhayana is that all the other of mind's functions are interrupted. The practitioner of the Shravakayana or Pratyabodhayana will analyze the continuity of consciousness. On this basis, they will establish the non-existence of the individual, and then analysis and this conclusion, all of mind's other functions, aside from the basis for all consciousness, cease or are interrupted. From the Mahayana point of view, the functioning of the basis for all remains. From a Mahayana point of view, this basis for all functioning continues. This is why the Mahayana says that these arhats then need to engage in the Mahayana. That is the view of the Shravakayana from the Mahayana perspective. Then now we'll look at the Mahayana view from the Mahayana perspective and the differences. The Mahayana view perfectly establishes twofold non-existence, the non-existence of the individual and the non-existence of phenomena. Can be also stated at the emptiness of the individual and emptiness of phenomena. From the Mahayana perspective, the succession of moments of the continuity of mind, of the mind stream, continues even when the non-existence of the individual has been realized by an arhat. That's what we said earlier. The basis for all functioning remains. The emptiness of the individual has been realized by arhats. However, arhats think that there is still this continuum of mind that is free of identity. According to them, this continuum of mind is a phenomenon. They consider this continuity, this mind stream, to be a phenomenon. There are different opinions on this subject, but according to the Mahayana, this is why it is said that an arhat does not realize that the basis for all consciousness is also devoid of all reality. An arhat will consider the continuum of mind to be a phenomenon, and they will not realize the emptiness of this phenomenon. Therefore, they will not realize that the consciousness, the basis for all consciousness, is also, as a phenomenon, free of all reality. From the Mahayana perspective, once again, we look at knowable phenomena in two ways. The first way of considering phenomena consists in thinking that we are our five aggregates. That's what we call belief in the identity of the individual. When we believe that we are our five aggregates and we see ourselves as a truly existing individual. We perceive the individual as an identity, as existing. The second aspect or way of considering phenomena is when we consider phenomena generally as being real. Why? Because they are able to accomplish a function, because they are efficient. For example, Khenpo said to us, if someone asks me who I am, I will answer. If it's Khenpo who's talking, then he'll say, I'm Khenpo. I'll say, I'm Jordy. And I'll point in this direction. I'll point at my aggregates. Why? Why would I do this? Because I consider my aggregates as being me. Me, I'm my aggregates. My aggregates are me. That's the first perspective. An example of the second perspective that Khenpo gave us, he said, if someone asks me if my glasses are real, I will say, yes, of course they are. Why? Because they allow me to clearly read what is written. My glasses are able to accomplish a function. They are efficient. That's why they exist. If there weren't any glasses, then I couldn't see. This is how our mind functions, Khenpo told us. And on this basis, we think that mind that apprehends and the phenomena apprehended truly exist as two separate entities. We believe that they exist separately. This is how we relate to phenomena. But in the Mahayana, as in the other yanas, the Shravakayana and the Pratyekabuddhayana, it is taught that the individual does not truly exist. The individual is only an idea, an invention. Because if the individual were truly existing, then we would be able to find it. Where is this individual? Where's Jordy? Is Jordy in her aggregate of forms? Is Jordy in her particles of matter? Shantideva, in the Bodhicharya Avatara, the way of the Bodhisattva, asks us questions. he doesn't talk about Jordi, of course, but he says, is Jordi her head? Is Jordi her hand? Is Jordi her leg? Is her leg Jordi? Whatever we analyze, for example, if we analyze Jordi's hand, which in fact is just a bunch of fingers, is Jordi the skin? Is she the bones underneath? Wherever we look, Shantideva tells us, we won't find any Jordi. We won't find any individual. That's what corresponds with a coarse perspective that Khenpo spoke about earlier, considering the individual to be its 5 aggregates. Then there's the subtler perspective, considering one's mind stream to be the individual. This is what Khenpo tells us. Then we can consider consciousness and the other aggregates related to mind, the aggregate of sensations, distinctions, conditioning phenomena, all of those. And we can ask ourselves if they are our true identity, if they are us. Consciousness, for example, is a succession of moments that continue, that don't last, they don't abide, they don't remain. So then the question comes, am I in the previous moment of consciousness, in the following moment of consciousness, or in the present moment of consciousness, my own previous moment of consciousness? If I look at my past moment of consciousness, it's not there anymore, so I can't be there. If I look at my future moment of consciousness, it's not yet there, so I couldn't be there either. The previous instant of consciousness and the future moment of consciousness cannot make up myself. Perhaps then what I might find is that I am in my present moment of consciousness. The problem is that even the present moment of consciousness can be divided into past, present, and future. And each of these parts of the present moment of consciousness can be split into past, present, and future. In fact, I can't even find a present moment. If I can't find a present moment, then I can't say this present moment is me. This present moment of consciousness is my identity, because I can't even find a present moment of consciousness. So, in conclusion, Khenpo tells us, our identity cannot be found anywhere. This is why in the Mahayana, and also in the Sravakayana and Pratyekabodhayana, it is said that the individual does not truly exist. And the same is true for all other phenomena other than the individual. We can apply the same analysis to all phenomena, and then we can see that there's absolutely so all phenomena are empty by nature. And emptiness is not something fabricated. It's not an artificial state produced by what the Buddha taught. It is simply the mode of being of things. But we shouldn't conclude that emptiness is nothingness or a vacuum. Emptiness empty nature allows for the unhindered appearance of manifestation via dependent arising. Emptiness and manifestation are inseparable. There are specific causes that lead to specific results, and therefore to the appearance of manifestation. This manifestation is empty, but that doesn't mean that it has no existence, that it disappears. The difference between the two previous vehicles and the Mahayana is that in the Sravakayana and the Pratyekabodhayana, the realization of emptiness doesn't cover the second aspect. It doesn't include the emptiness of phenomena. Whereas in the Mahayana, both the emptiness of the individual and that of phenomena are established. We saw the first difference between the foundational vehicles and the Mahayana, which is the view to be realized. This brings us to the second difference, pardon me, which is the particularity of the intention and application. The second difference between the two previous vehicles and the Mahayana lies in the intention and application. The two previous vehicles do not incorporate the intention of bodhicitta and also do not incorporate application that consists in training in the paramitas. Paramitas being transcendent virtues. That's one way of translating that. If we first consider intention, what Khenpo explained is that practitioners of the Sravakayana and Pratyekabodhayana have a very heightened perception of the fact that samsara is nothing but suffering. And this understanding pushes them to attain liberation for themselves without focusing in any major way on others' suffering. Their heightened perception of the fact that samsara is only suffering leads them to want to liberate themselves without primarily or in any large way focusing on other beings. A bodhisattva will have this same heightened perception of the fact that samsara is nothing but suffering, but their reaction to this is different. They won't focus only on their own liberation. They'll also take into account all other sentient beings that find themselves in samsara and that are subject to the same suffering. They realize that they can't work only for their own liberation, and that all other beings are, in a way, members of their family, and they wish to help them as well. This is how they give rise to bodhicitta, or enlightened mind or enlightened attitude in English. To illustrate this difference, the Indian master Asanga gave an example. He said, if a house catches on fire, most people who are in this house will react by wanting to get out as quickly as possible from the burning building. But it's also possible that some people will think about helping the others and trying to all get out of the burning house together. This example illustrates the perspective of the practitioners of the two foundational vehicles and practitioners of the Mahayana vehicle. That covers intention. Then there is the particularity of application in the Mahayana. In the Mahayana, a bodhisattva practices the 6 paramitas in order to accomplish the benefit of beings. That's the particularity of application in the Mahayana. We can take a short silent break. This brings us to the third difference. What is abandoned on the path? The third difference between the foundational vehicles and the Mahayana, according to Karmapa Mika Dorje, lies in what is abandoned on the path. In the Shravakayana and the Prajakyabudayana, a practitioner concentrates on abandoning the afflictive obscurations. This concerns the view of an identity and the other afflictive obscurations that arise on this basis. In other words, the 6 root afflictive obscurations and the 20 related ones. The Buddhist scriptural sources call this the veil of afflictive obscurations. The second type of veil is the veil of knowledge, veil of the knowable. The first veil is the veil of afflictive obscurations, and the second type is the veil of the knowable. This veil prevents us from knowing the empty nature of all phenomena. What is the consequence of not seeing the empty nature of phenomena? An individual who is subject to the veil of the knowable won't have the possibility, won't be able to accomplish the benefit of beings in a major way. If a bodhisattva practitioner has not yet actualized the emptiness of phenomena, when they'll engage in actions to accomplish the benefit of beings, they may be attached to things, and if they encounter difficulties, then they'll get discouraged. If they haven't actualized the emptiness of phenomena, then when they encounter difficulties, phenomena will appear real to them. They'll be attached to certain things and then will experience a certain amount of rejection towards this. When we're attached to things, then we reject them. Others, they'll be feel certain dis-ease in certain situations and then feel discouraged. If a bodhisattva knows the emptiness of the individual and of all phenomena, then even if what they are doing is difficult to accomplish, they won't become discouraged. There's nothing that depresses them because they know that phenomena are emptiness and that everything they do is emptiness. Then they're not limited by discouragement, depression, etc. In any of the situations that they encounter. They'll always be aware that everything is emptiness, and regardless of what happens, they won't be disturbed or upset by events. They'll never get discouraged. And therefore, when a bodhisattva wants to accomplish the benefit of beings, the emptiness, the knowledge of the emptiness of the individual and of phenomena is absolutely necessary. If we know the emptiness, if we know the emptiness of these two things according to these two perspectives, then all limitations will disappear and we will have a capacity to accomplish the benefit of beings in an extremely vast way. A bodhisattva will free themselves or go beyond both the veil of afflictive obscurations and the veil of the knowable, whereas a practitioner of the Shravakayana or Pratyabhuddhayana will primarily focus on the veil of afflictive obscurations. And will not know the empty nature of all phenomena. And will not engage like a bodhisattva in order to accomplish the benefit of all beings. And then Khenpo gave an example of the way that a bodhisattva's intention and application work. He talked to us about the 16th Karmapa. The 16th Karmapa explained that in 1959, when the Chinese army invaded Tibet, the day that he left Chokfu Monastery to go to India, he saw that right then, he needed to leave his monastery and his country. And at that moment, he committed to establishing the Buddhist teaching when he arrived in India. He knew that he needed to leave Tibet and he knew that he needed to go to India. And he committed to establishing the Buddhist teaching in India upon him. And thanks to this commitment that he made, the moment that he arrived in Sikkim, he began doing what was necessary for this. And he established, notably, Rumtek Monastery. Try to imagine an ordinary refugee who has to leave their country. In this case, not Karmapa, but just an ordinary refugee. Imagine the kind of worries that such a refugee might be thinking about. How do they get out? What road, what paths do they take once they've gotten where they need to go? How will they survive? How will they find housing, food, etc.? An individual like Karmapa, who has the knowledge of emptiness, according to these two perspectives, will act in a different way. His activity for others is what comes first, and thus takes on a much larger dimension. The 16th Karmapa gave up everything that the Karmapas created over 15 generations. He left behind members of his family, he left behind his country, without this being a problem. The only thing that he was thinking about at the moment of leaving, when he knew that he needed to leave, was how he could establish the Buddhist teaching in the country where he'd wind up. This is how bodhisattvas who have this type of realization, who are free of these two types of veils, are not limited, as opposed to ordinary beings. And this is how they are able to accomplish the benefit of beings in such a vast way, without getting discouraged, without getting depressed. We'll stop there today. We'll cover the 4th and 5th differences between the foundational vehicles and the Mahayana tomorrow. And we'll also look at the presentation of the Mahayana in and of itself. There are 7 minutes If there aren't any other questions, I have a little one. Concerning the fruit of the Pratyeka Buddhayana, we distinguished the different divisions and the results of these different divisions. So rhinoceros and the parrots. When we talked about the parrots, we said that they could attain the state of arhathood in 2 or 3 lives. I'm not sure if it's because I wasn't paying attention but I thought I understood that they attained the fruit of arhathood of the path of seeing, and that's all. Or do they go further? No. They accomplish the wisdom of the path of junction and the path of seeing, and then they attain the state of arhathood. So they will accomplish the path of familiarization and of no more learning. So in terms of fruit, it's the same fruit as the rhinoceros. Yes. I also wanted to know the difference between enlightenment and full and perfect enlightenment. That means realizing that the 8th consciousness, the basis for all, has no existence. This depends on what we understand in terms of enlightenment and perfect enlightenment. If you, by perfect enlightenment, mean the state of Buddhahood, and if by enlightenment we understand the state of arhathood, but that's not necessarily obvious. Most of the time when we talk about enlightenment, we talk about the state of Buddha. We can also talk about perfect enlightenment. Depends about what you're considering with each of these terms. Well, actually, I don't know. Both terms can be used in text, so I don't know. Here, in what Khenpo says, it seems to me that he doesn't use the term enlightenment in the context of the Shravakayana and Pratyeka Buddhayana. If we start with this notion that enlightenment and perfect enlightenment correspond with the state of Buddhahood, then there's no difference. If we consider the fruit of the Shravakayana and the Pratyeka Buddhayana to be enlightenment, then there is a difference, and this will be explained tomorrow in the next section, which explains the difference between the fruit to actualize, between the first 2 paths and the path of the Mahayana. When you spoke about the 2 veils, you said that the veil of afflictive obscurations was the only one that is abandoned by practitioners of the foundational vehicles, but that they couldn't help beings in a vast way because attachment arose for them. But isn't that an afflictive obscuration? After Khenpo talked about bodhisattvas who are not yet free of the veil of the knowable, who are still on the path, and when they accomplish the benefit of beings, they might have difficulties and be attached to certain things and get discouraged. However, in the case of the Shravakayana, there's not this intention to accomplish the benefit of beings in a vast way. So they just won't commit to that. They won't engage in that direction. Like what Khenpo said is that they don't have the possibility to, we can't really accomplish the benefit of beings if we still have this veil of the knowable, because we'll get discouraged when we encounter difficult situations, and we can get discouraged. So what he said is that in the Shravakayana, they concentrate on the eradication of the veil of afflictive obscurations. What he says is that that's what they're focused on. Of course, once they attain the state of Arhat, they won't be reborn in samsara, but not much is happening. Only the 8th consciousness functions. They're in samadhi. Nothing else is going on. They can't enter into this kind of situation, in fact, where they'll try to accomplish the benefit of beings, because they're in samadhi. In terms of the veil of the knowable, everything that concerns the non-existence of the identity of phenomena, they haven't realized that. The veil of the knowable is still present, but because they don't engage in the benefit of beings, the accomplishment of the benefit of beings, then they won't encounter difficulties like a beginner practitioner who hasn't yet realized the absence of essence of phenomena, and who, when they encounter difficult situations, will get discouraged. Does that answer your question? What I understood from your question, let's see. In what Olivier said, he said that if a bodhisattva practitioner has not yet actualized the emptiness of phenomena, then when they engage in the benefit of beings, they could be attached to things and get discouraged. And you asked a question concerning the Shravakaya, the practitioners of the Shravakayana and the Pratyekya Buddhayana. So his answer to your question works with that. But I also think your question could apply in terms of a bodhisattva, because a bodhisattva normally has also eliminated the veil of afflictive obscurations. And so what we were thinking is, what comes up for us is that, in fact, even though they have eliminated the veil of afflictive obscurations, there are still tendencies related to afflictive obscurations that remain up through the seventh bhumi. And that's why it's possible that afflictive obscurations may arise concerning phenomena that they have, of which they have not yet realized the emptiness. That's the answer that I came up with in terms of that question, because I was wondering about that question myself. It's 4:35. Let's conclude here.
Sunam diye tamshe zipani tomne nyepe janam pajene kega nachi balab chupa sibet sole roa shon chambel bawe chita ken batan kundo sambo te yan te shinte te ta kingi jesu dalubi kewa dita tamshe rabtumu Sangye kuso nyebe jinlaptan cheni migyoden Gendun miche dinbe jinlapki Chitang owa menlap druba sho